Mesdames et messieurs, the greatest festival of our contemporary society, the Olympic Games, is about to begin. This is going to be close.
Oh! They're all completely gassed! They've given it everything on the global bucket! Oh, yeah! No! Oh!
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. But that is an Olympic championship.
Ready?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Keep the Flame Alive, the podcast for fans of the Olympics and Paralympics. If you love the games, we are the show for you. I am your host, Jill Jaracz, joined as always by my lovely co-host, Alison Brown. Alison, hello, how are you?
Hello, I think I need Renska Locke, our sleep expert, to come back on and give me some lessons.
Oh,
I am waking up at all the wrong times. My circadian rhythms are just not what they're supposed to be. So, Dr. Locke, help me.
oh no. Oh. Well, that was a good episode to go back and listen to if you haven't heard how she studied how elite athletes had their circadian rhythms and when they traveled around the world for competitions, things that they did to get their bodies on a different clock more quickly than would be normal for a body.
Can't have jet lag if you're arriving the day before a competition.
No, you can't. You can't. So,
I don't have any problems with jet lag because I'm not going anywhere. I just can't sleep on the Eastern time zone, apparently.
well, I hope you will be awake for our 400th show, which is coming up.
I will be so there.
Excellent. Excellent. We will be recording episode 400 with you, dear listeners. We're going to have a little party in the Keep the Flame Alive podcast recording studio.
Keep the flame alive.
Right. So we are going to record on Monday evening, July 14th, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be a kind of a party atmosphere. We will be able to have multiple people coming in and going out. And hopefully that means that you can join us as well and have a little conversation, talk about what you're looking forward to for Milan, Cortina, or even if you're just already ready for LA 2028. We want to hear from you and be able to talk with multiple people at once. We'll have a link to our studio in the show notes that you can go to on July 14th, 8 to 10. We'll also put that information in our Facebook group. So get excited and come and party with us. I don't know if this is a party or something to celebrate. Oh, well, perhaps something to celebrate. Remember back in April when LA 2028 announced that it would be the first Olympics to have more quota spots for women than men?
And we were confused.
Right. And we didn't know if we should celebrate or not. So we brought back our gender and sports expert, Dr. Michele K. Donnelly, to talk to us about what that really means in terms of gender parity and equity. And, well, we didn't get to equality because that's just a ways down the road, really. But she came on and peeled back the layers of LA 2028's press release to tell us how fair their gender numbers really are. Dr. Donnelly is an associate professor in sport management at Brock University in Ontario, Canada. And you will remember that she talked with us about ahead of Paris 2024 to drill down to see what their celebration of gender parity really meant. Now we're going to look at LA 2028 to see how much more improved, maybe, the gender situation is for those games. Take a listen. Dr. Michele Donnelly, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you for the invitation. It's always
LA 2028 is touting more women than men for the first time. You have read the fine print. Not equality, or not a good idea as it might sound. You've got thoughts. Talk to us.
I do have thoughts. Yeah, I haven't quite recovered from the talk about equality at Paris, and now now we're taking that next step to say better than equality. One of the main things that I'm going into this with and feeling so much discomfort about is claims about gender equality or gender equity or gender parity, whatever it might be, that are exclusively focused on women. And I think it is a surprise to me to be the person at times saying, but what about the men athletes? But when we're talking gender, right? Gender isn't just code for girls and women. It's about men and women, and ideally about folks who do not identify as men or women and identify as more, with more gender diverse categories. But certainly Olympic wise, we're not there at all. And in fact, seeing some really concerning retrenchment and exclusions in that area. But the claims that actions are being taken, decisions are being made in the interests of gender equality that actually are harmful to one group of athletes relative to another group of athletes, that's not gender equality. And I think if there was more clarity or transparency around, like, is this a not an affirmative action moment, but like, do we want to swing to having more women than men in order to address some of those historical kinds of exclusions? That's a decision that can be made, but there are consequences of that decision. And I think especially right now, with the really tight kind of control of 10,500 athletes and really limiting the quota for the additional sports for the games, it really feels like a zero-sum game. If you are giving to one, it is taking away from the other. So I think that is definitely something that we have to be aware of. And then just the numbers themselves, right? They're interesting. They saw something just recently saying, Nordic combined is the only remaining Olympic event that doesn't include women. And it's not true, because Greco-Roman wrestling does not include women. And that would be the discipline or the event, right? Equivalent to something like Nordic combined under a larger sport. So there are, odd differences. The 2 additional apparatus for men in artistic gymnastics are being balanced out by having 2 rhythmic gymnastics events for women where there aren't equivalents for men. I do have to investigate further, but I was surprised to see the artistic swimming events are being counted as exclusively women's events. And I believe at Paris that men were eligible for at least the team event, not the duet necessarily, but the team event. So that's no longer an exclusively women's event if eligibility is open to men athletes as well, but that's where it's being counted. So yeah, I mean, there's still those elements of semi-creative counting that are happening. And then decisions that can look relatively altruistic, but actually have a very clear kind of case for why they're being made. So the flip in having 16 women's teams in the football or soccer tournament and 12 men's teams, we have to remember that FIFA is the governing body kind of putting forward their proposals for the Olympic Games. They haven't gotten themselves together to offer a women's club World Cup in the way that they offer a men's club World Cup. There's still that restriction on the men's teams at the Olympic Games to be predominantly under 23 teams, whereas on the women's side, you're seeing the national teams. So they're really using that Olympic competition as an additional World Cup style competition, where the men's competition is not that. It's more of a junior World Cup kind of situation. So that economically, right? Like, there's a business case, I think, there for that. And it's not an altruistic, let's have more women's teams at the Olympic Games than men's.
Makes me think how they're counting equestrian numbers. Where do you put those? Because you can have an all-male team, an all-female team, or any combination thereof. So yeah, are we playing fast and loose with numbers here?
Yeah, so for the longest time in their reporting, until about 2021, 22, in their women in sport kind of updates, the IOC counted open events as they counted them only on the women's side and not on the men's side. Beginning with like I said, around 21, 22, and certainly with the push to more mixed gender events, they now count them as an additional category. So here are the number of women's events and then the mixed gender and open events. But yeah, for the longest time, they were only showing up in the women's numbers. So the number of women's events was over-reported based on those open events. And yeah, equestrian remains the only, I guess you could say, artistic swimming now with the ability to include men on the teams. That would be an open. And the distinction I'm making there is that open is anybody can participate. Mixed gender is there is a requirement for a certain number of men athletes and a certain number of women athletes in an event. So we've seen that number go up for Los Angeles. They're reporting 25 mixed gender events. And then there's concerning stuff in that area as well. So race walking has lost an event entirely. So where we saw going into Paris, right, rather than adding a 50K race walk for women, which, as you know from your close relationship now with Canada's own Evan Dunphy, right? Women compete in a 50K race walk at the World Championships. It's not that there aren't women in the world doing that event. And rather than adding that for Paris, they took away that 50K race walk and invented a mixed gender event. And it won't even get more than one chance. It's not part of the program for Los Angeles. And instead we see a mixed gender 4x100 meter relay, which I'm sure will be fun to watch and exciting, but we know that sprints already get a disproportionate amount of attention out of the track events. And that is somewhere where we did see kind of briefly, I'm not sure that the kind of question has continued, but those sprint athletes, because of heats, quarters, semis, finals, race a lot. And then if you add a mixed gender relay, because as I've spoken to you about before, right, those mixed gender events are not adding athletes. They're pulling athletes who have already qualified for their single gender events. So that's additional races for those athletes. And that can be a lot. And like you were saying, I mean, your experience in Paris, it's hot. It's right. Like there's a lot going on and you're extending the competition for particular athletes in those events. The relays are kind of different because you don't have to have your set four right up front, right through the qualifying, but it still is additional races for athletes. And this sense, right? We've added mixed gender events. It's a medal event that is in the interests of the international federations to have another medal event in their sport, but it's not adding any athletes. It's not actually contributing to having more athletes at the games.
You're not giving more opportunities. You're just giving more medals.
Yeah, more opportunities to compete once you are already there, rather than more opportunities for athletes to qualify to compete at the games.
Or if you work through the numbers, there are still 4 more men's events than women's events on the program. We've talked about more mixed gender events, but we still have more men's than women's. What does that signify?
Yeah, it's one of the, I think, more bizarre kinds of decisions that is being made to say we're going to equalize, if not have more women athletes, right? To say that the athlete quotas, all of that excitement in Paris for the first time, gender parity in those athlete quotas, it feels like such an easy number. It feels like such an easy thing to just say, and in the number of events. It would make some of those hashtag gender equal Olympics, right, things more compelling if it wasn't limited to this very specific piece of it. And it's something that the IOC controls. So as much as they like to defer, right, to say, well, we don't control the sports, it's the international federations, we can't, tell them what to do in that regard. They're the ones approving the program. And right, so it would be very easy for them to approve a program to say equal number of events for men and women. And it's hard to come out on the more men's event side when you still have two events, and say we're counting artistic swimming there, saying that's a women only event, rhythmic gymnastics, women only event. You only have Greco-Roman wrestling on the men's side that is an event that, so how we end up still with more men's events than women's events is tricky, I think. And again, I would reiterate, right? Like the way that this has been done is really a problem that needs to be addressed. So we're looking at the Los Angeles program. It's saying boxing, we're going to have an equal number of weight categories for men and women. So it's 7 and 7 for Los Angeles. If we look at London, 2012, when women first compete in boxing, there were 13 events, 10 weight categories for men, 3 weight categories for women. Those 7 weight categories for women have been achieved, consistently taking away from men until Los Angeles, where it looks like there's been 1 additional weight category for women to bring it up to the even, right? To have 7 and 7. But there's not a fairness there. There's not an equality there to say now there will be fewer opportunities for men in order to add those opportunities for women. And I think probably my biggest concern there is when the international federations release their press releases and the IOC releases its press release and says these decisions are being made in the interest of gender equality. It makes gender equality something that looks like it's contentious and against one group in the interests of another group. And that's just not what gender equality should be. There should be no way to oppose decisions that are made in the interests of gender equality, because it shouldn't be, we're going to take from you to give to the others.
So, really, is the problem with the construct of the athlete quota of 10,500? Should the IOC just let that go, even though it's in the charter? Let that go and let the chips fall where they may? And I get that a quota is helpful because you have to provide resources for, you have to have a village for so many. But if you have a city that needs housing and an athlete's village becomes housing at the end of the day, or, well, I guess in the case of LA, they're using existing college dorms. But if you're doing something that is adding housing to a city and National Olympic committees basically have to pay for those athletes anyway, why not just make it a bigger celebration?
Yeah, and so we're looking at, if you look at through Tokyo, you're over 11,000 athletes at each of the games. Certainly from the time when I start looking, like London through,
Mhm.
you're 11,000 to 300, right? Athletes in that range. What the IOC has done, again, without clarity around it or saying this, all of those recommendations that were a part of Agenda 2020, the strategic roadmap for the Olympic Games, we were told that's like a jigsaw puzzle and no one recommendation has priority over other recommendations. That's not borne out in their actions, right? That's not evidenced in their actions. That structure for the Olympic Games has been prioritized over almost all of the recommendations, right? To say 10,500 cap on the Summer Games, and there's an event cap on there as well, or sort of a recommended event cap. So if you enforce that, right, at the same time that you're saying you need to increase the number of opportunities for women athletes and events for women, then the international federations are working within, you can't add any athlete quota spaces, you can't add any events unless you're taking away something else. And so the international federations have made their decisions within that framework of, if you want to add something, you have to be kind of showing what you're willing to give up. And so it is, unsurprising. I keep thinking like the anticipated and unanticipated consequences, but I think it's too generous to say that's an unanticipated consequence. It's kind of obvious if you say within this new kind of more strict framework of numbers first, then also this expectation that you're hearing that you have more opportunities for women. You're bringing, right, the opportunities for women in terms of number of athletes and number of events closer to those opportunities for men. There's only one there's only one way to achieve that. And I would say, and I mean, I certainly would hold the IOC responsible for that, that these recommendations have been made without any sense of what does that look like in action and how should international federations be achieving that. I think there's an important and kind of historical, so we can see how it's played out kind of parallel in terms of Title IX in the US, right? So you have this legislation that comes in that says you can't discriminate based on sex in any educational program that receives federal funding. Doesn't say anything about sport, in spite of the fact that that's almost exclusively how we think about Title IX, because that's where it had some of its biggest effects, right? We saw just dramatically increased numbers of women athletes and teams for women in school sport, at colleges and universities. But there are very clear guidelines about how you can and cannot demonstrate compliance with Title IX. And one of those is very clearly you cannot take away from men to add for women or simply remove from men to equalize your numbers. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. That doesn't mean it doesn't continue to happen, that universities will report, right? We're getting rid of men's swimming, tennis, right? Those kind of more minor sports. And still in those press releases, you'll read something about compliance with Title IX. And it's like, but the actual compliance documents say you can't do that. That's not, you can do that, but it will not, that doesn't bring you into compliance with Title IX. That's not a way of achieving that goal. So even, right, when you have that framework, when you have kind of those very clear, here are the things that you need to be doing and or not doing in order to achieve this outcome, you see it. And then in this case of the IOC kind of sending this message to the international sport federations, there was no guidance. So like I said, it isn't surprising that this is where we ended up, I think.
Does this program do anything for improving the funding of women's sports in the Olympics?
So at their national levels, like going through to the Olympics, there's a very, I think, still which comes first funding for women's sport or your place at the Olympic Games. I mean, one of the really interesting things about seeing the program that's been approved for Los Angeles and the messaging around it is the very straightforward, kind of easy and missed decision for the next Winter Olympic Games to not have Nordic combined for women. It is at the Winter Olympic Games, the one remaining event where women do not compete. Women now have a World Championships for Nordic combined. There's a World Cup for Nordic combined. So there are women competing. Why make that decision? It's my understanding, the FIS, right? Like the Ski Federation brought it forward, proposed it, and it was declined. Making sense of that in this kind of summer context of a games that is already more equal numerically is confusing and relates to your question about funding, because what more can the International Ski Federation do besides having a World Championships, a World Cup circuit, right, for women's Nordic combined, which then presumably in some ways incentivizes national Olympic committees, national sport federations to invest in women's participation in Nordic combined, and then they still don't have that opportunity of the Olympic Games. And there are a huge number of events under all of the international sport federations, right, that aren't Olympic events, but that one is and has been since the beginning of the Winter Olympics. So it would be such an achievement, something to celebrate, right? To finally have women competing in every event at the Winter Olympic Games. And it hasn't happened. And it's not venue. It's not, right? Like, those things are in place because that event exists. Those things are in place because that event is actually made up of 2 other events that women compete in, right? So, and you're not looking at adding even 100 athletes. You're looking at adding 20, right? Like 12. I mean, we've seen the numbers be very small when women's events are initially added. So it's not, right, it's not a make or break. It certainly doesn't feel like that. And the Winter Olympic Games have typically been under the cap that is set for them. So yeah, like I said, it's hard to reconcile the decisions and the celebration that's being made around the Summer Olympic Games with that decision, particularly about the Winter Olympic Games.
What do you see a new president perhaps doing in this realm of gender equity, equality, parity?
It's a very good question.
And even athlete quota. I mean, it's very interesting too. Now we have a female president who is also an athlete, but we're coming off of 2 athlete presidents.
Yeah. I'm interested to see how much emphasis there is moving forward, given what I would characterize as kind of overly celebratory claims about Paris and looking ahead to Los Angeles. There certainly has been a demonstration through these events and those decisions being made that there is an interest only in numbers, only in parity. There hasn't been actually too much conversation about equality in terms of conditions of participation for athletes. And we're seeing a little bit of that shift to now thinking, which I think is important, it has to be part of the conversation, women participants as coaches, as technical officials, right, as officials in sports. But I think it behooves the IOC to go back to its own gender equality review project, its own recommendations to continue, if not initiate, that conversation with international sport federations about if there are differences in the ways that men and women are participating in your sport, why? Are they justified? Are they necessary? Should they continue? So I think that does need to be part of the conversation. I think we will certainly see, I wonder if a first ever young woman president of the IOC will want to be as associated with a discussion about gender equality as her 2 men predecessors were able to be, where we know that men get far more accolades for taking on something like gender equality as a project, where a woman, it might be less, well, it might be, I think it would be less celebrated for her to kind of continue the conversation. And I think we are in an increasingly complex moment around the perpetuation of ideas about protecting the women's category, which I think is a really important piece of understanding how we're not at gender equality yet, right? That the same arguments that are being used to forward those incredibly exclusionary positions about who belongs in women's sport are the same foundational assumptions that mean that in some events, women continue to race over shorter distances, use lighter equipment, right? Smaller venues. They're the same basic kinds of understandings of women athletes as less than and in need of protection and accommodations.
What are your hopes on what LA has decided in terms of gender and making it more fair?
Yeah, I hope that it is the experience that we want it to be for all athletes. I hope that it provides an opportunity to discuss those remaining things like, okay, if we've gotten here with the quota, let's look at the number of events. If we've gotten here with, right, like those kinds of things, I think will be important. I think it is a useful opportunity for a country like the United States that I would say is both viewed globally, but also views itself as really a leader in terms of women's involvement in sport, promoting girls and women playing sport, for some self-reflection about what's happening. We still have really concerning participation numbers, decreasing for everyone, physical activity and sport participation. But when we've never had equivalent participation for girls and women as boys and men, then those decreasing numbers are decreasing from that lower level. We haven't done much to address that really concerning kind of adolescent dropout period for girls, particularly. So, I hope that Los Angeles kind of, and these claims about gender equality, right? And what this games is relative to previous games, that it potentially provides that platform for those conversations. And hopefully not in the really kind of simplistic and unsupported ways that we've seen, right? That like hosting an Olympic Games will inspire participation, which there's just no evidence to support. But hopefully in legacy planning, in decision making, kind of figuring out how to realize the potential of participation after games.
So we get this question a lot when we get interviewed is what do you think of transgender athletes participating in women's sports? And I'm curious as to how you would answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I do presentations quite regularly related to gender inclusion in sport, and I have my 5 non-negotiables that I typically present at the beginning. The first one is trans women are women. The second one is we're all learning, we can make mistakes, but they're really only mistakes when we show that we learn from them and do things differently. I can never remember the third one. The fourth one is there is a crisis of participation in sport and physical activity. This is not it. This is the absolutely minuscule number of trans athletes trying to participate in sport is not a crisis. And then number 5 is trans women are women. So I think there are eligibility requirements for all athletes. The IOC actually incredibly had what now seems like progressive policy in 2000, right? Like saying for trans women to participate in sport, here are the requirements, right? Like here's what you have to do. I don't know what has happened. The downloading of responsibility for this decision making to international federations just seems to have really facilitated this incredibly regressive, exclusionary approach. I think roller derby is a fantastic example of where these kind of slippery slope arguments, like if you have trans women competing in sport, then you'll never have cis women winning medals ever again. And I think that's not actually happening anywhere. Is it? Like that's
Right, because you have competed with trans women
yeah,
somewhere along the way with roller derby. Yeah, so the argument that trans women are taking over women's sports isn't valid because there's a way to compete against a cis woman and there's a way to compete against a trans woman. You
yeah,
just have to find the competitive edge,
yeah.
right?
And I mean, I've been hit harder and am far more scared of cis women in my roller derby career than any trans women that I have played with. And I think also, like, there's the really positive thing about being in a space where the position is inclusion is I shouldn't know if I've played with trans women or not played with trans women unless that person has chosen to tell me. What's so incredibly harmful about this current moment of moving forward with these exclusionary policies is that all girls and women are now at risk. If you're too good, if you don't look the way people think you're supposed to look, it's not just questioning a competitive advantage, it's literally questioning your identity. And that is something that will keep girls and women from participating in sport, cis girls and women from participating in sport, not only trans girls and women from participating in sport. The fact that we are full circle back at sport organizations in the US literally suggesting that they would do physical inspections of girls to determine whether or not they belong in the girls category. The fact that World Athletics is bringing back a cheek swab and chromosome testing that was so thoroughly debunked, it was removed from the sex testing process. Yes, so all of that to say, my response is if athletes are meeting the eligibility requirements, there is a place for trans women in women's sport. To pretend otherwise is hugely damaging for all girls and women. And a colleague of mine, Risa Issard, wrote a short piece a number of years ago now about the risk associated with stereotype threat, right? That if you keep telling girls and women, you're not good enough to participate against boys and men, which is a horrifyingly offensive kind of characterization, right, of trans girls and women's participation in sport. But you're not good enough. You'll never win. You can't do this. That's more harmful than being in competition where you might lose and have to get better. Yeah, the continued suggestion that there would be no possibility, that there's no future for cis women in sport is just, there just doesn't seem to be any actual evidentiary grounds for it. And we seem to be very much in the realm of anecdote, pseudoscience, selective science, certainly, as justification for excluding trans women. And then now, even, right, like we're seeing World Athletics go way, way down that road and say women with differences of sexual development, which again is one of those things where there's just that hugely dramatic distinction from men's sport to women's sport. You know, we talk about a Michael Phelps and we say basically if you built a swimmer in a laboratory, you would build Michael Phelps. Long torso, huge wingspan, right? Doesn't suffer from lactic acid production the way that his competitors do. And that is celebrated only, right? It's celebrated. That is incredible. Nobody is saying that gives him an unfair competitive advantage over his, right? Over the other people in the race, even though it objectively does. And on the women's side, we're saying we're going to have an even more narrow definition of what makes you eligible for the women's category. And that is terrible on so many levels.
Well, and the fact that it's focused on the women's category is frustrating because trans men also compete in sport and elite sport. But I'm guessing that many of the disadvantages that they face, like we've talked with Ness Murby, smaller hands, bigger discus. That's I guess I would say unfair, but it's a makes them not as competitive. So I don't
But
know.
you
I don't
also
know where
have
I'm going with that,
trans
but it is
yeah,
frustrating. Yeah.
yeah, trans men and even cis men who can get a therapeutic use exemption for testosterone, the literal naturally produced substance that women are being excluded from the women's category for because their bodies make on average higher levels of it, right? And it ignores things like androgen insensitivity, right? Like all of these various complexities of human bodies that just cannot be distilled down to one or two characteristics that you can say, if this, then you fit. And if not, this is not a category for you. And then, I mean, again, like the really offensive kind of identity challenging pieces around, but if you don't meet these criteria, you can still compete in the men's category. It doesn't matter if you know yourself as a woman, you've lived your entire life as a woman, everybody in your life, like there are, yeah, I think all of those assumptions, right, about those very paternalistic and at times condescending assumptions about protecting the women's category, right? Or to protect the women's category from women who are born as women or women who go through incredible processes to, right, live as women is like I said, I think the really take home piece is just how harmful it is for all girls and women, and that it makes sport participation riskier, much more dangerous proposition. If I could play sport and someone could actually question whether or not I'm girl enough to be in this sport, or I could be in the band, or I could, you know, be in the debate club. There are other places where I could be where that isn't a risk.
I mean, I can say I wouldn't let my daughter play sport if I knew there was a chance of a physical exam. I'd say forget it.
Yeah. Or if you're even having to have a conversation about like, "Mom, I wanna get my hair cut short." Like, of course you should be able to do that, but you know, I'm worried about our next soccer game and what a parent on the other team might say if you're our top scorer or our star goalkeeper, right? All of a sudden, there's that much more attention, and we're in a moment where people are emboldened to say that you would hope that would never be said, at least publicly, but it is. That's where we are right now.
Frustrating.
Yes.
This is a random question, and not really with gender, but if we look at LA 2028 and you have this new batch, huge batch of new sports, but one of the things I noticed is that in the initial quotas, if we're going to talk about quota numbers, squash had, I don't know, maybe 64 and they got cut down to 32 or something. In the like by the time all said and done, squash gave up a lot and they've been trying to get in the games for a long time. And who knows if that will be big enough participation for them to even stay in the games. Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. Uh,
Excellent.
um,
That's why we love you, Michelle.
yes. Squash is a great example. I mean, squash has to have spent millions of dollars over the last 2 or 3 decades, right? Trying to be added to the Olympic program, to be added right now in this very precarious way of not having any guarantees moving beyond Los Angeles. And squash, I think, has done its work. It is a global sport, right? Like it meets that universality kind of criteria for the games. So, yes, it will be interesting to see what happens with it. But yeah, it's that tiny number. You also have cricket and lacrosse, right? Team sports coming in a reduced form. Baseball and softball seem to be an exception here because they have a history on the program and now they're coming back. And the US, it absolutely makes sense, right? It made sense in Tokyo for baseball and softball to be there. But yeah, you have these kind of smaller version lacrosse and cricket. So it's a moment where we seem to see international sport federations kind of responding to this quota cap and looking at team sport events for how they can have lower athlete requirements on each team. So the fact that it's rugby sevens, right, in the Olympics and not 15s, we're going to see this smaller version of lacrosse. Baseball is even piloting and has going a smaller version of baseball, right? Which presumably is a little bit with an eye on the games to thinking like, how do we get back in there permanently? Like the fact that basketball has maintained, right, the full tournament and the 3x3, but I think that's a model for a number of sports kind of looking at, oh, this is a way in. So you have that interesting, again, the IOC saying we don't control the sports. That's the international sport federations have autonomy and making decisions about their own sports, but we're certainly seeing expectations about the Olympic program having larger influences, it seems like, on the development of sports right now than we would have seen in the past, I think. That kind of size-wise, certainly for the team sports, and then also how do we develop events that we can sell as I was just reading World Rowing's press release and about the coastal rowing beach sprints that are dynamic, fast-paced, and spectator friendly. So, right, that push for like, I can watch someone row like a really long day, or you go watch them run on the beach, right, and jump in the water and do that piece. And so I think for something like squash, the more they can figure out how to really televise their sport in a way that is compelling, that may be one of the best ways to make their case for continued inclusion at the games.
It'll be interesting.
Yes. And it's interesting, like looking at a winter sport example, you have the decision to, rather than add a women's 4 bobsled, right, to go with the monobob. Like, we get another thing, but look, it's smaller. We're not asking for that many places. We're not asking for too much.
Right, right. And sometimes the arguments are, because monobob is just one, why don't they have a men's and a women's monobob, with the argument of smaller countries that can't afford bigger sleds can excel in monobob, because we've talked with an Australian who is right up at the top of the rankings. So that's really exciting to see the global participation in bobsled, but why not have that on the men's side too, instead of let Germany win it all the time?
Yeah. And that's where you hear these arguments that get made that suggest we have higher expectations of women's sport than we have of men's sport, right? Like the monobob is all of these things. And then because it isn't translated onto the men's side, the suggestion is women's sport does have to be more inclusive in those ways. It does have to be more accessible. And it's like, this all sounds good. This sounds good for any sport. Like, why wouldn't that be your universal? Yeah, instead of saying, we'll keep the 4s on the men's side. Women can't have 4s. You can have the monobob.
Never mind the higher expectation on female athletes than male athletes as human beings. We won't even we'll be here for another 3 hours if we have that conversation.
Yeah,
But it
right.
is
And
that
then the
piece, right?
monobob,
That
yeah.
kind of like morality, role modeling, all of those pieces that get put on individual women athletes that also seem to be, right, of the sports themselves, the events, whether it's the WNBA as a league, right, has to show up in a different way than the NBA, but also, these kinds of claims about, we need this event to be more accessible to more different kinds of people in different places and socioeconomic status, right? Like all of those kinds of things. It's like, why isn't that just our baseline expectation of sport? Why all of those, when it comes in, right, it is part of that kind of justifying making a different decision about women's sport in a way that then makes you think, yeah, there's different values here, which is weird.
That's a good word to end it on.
Yeah. Weird.
Oh,
Yeah.
Dr. Michele Donnelly, thank you so much for joining us again. As always, it's a great conversation with you. We love having you on.
Thank you so much. Yes, I love having these conversations with you. You ask such great questions.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Michele. You can find out more about Dr. Donnelly's research at brocku.ca. We will have a link to that in the show notes. Oh, world boxing.
We thought things were getting better when AIBA or international boxing kind of went away. Guess what? World boxing is problematic too.
Yeah, so we talked about boxing with Dr. Donnelly, and recently, this past week, World Boxing has announced a new policy called Sex, Age, and Weight, which includes mandatory genetic sex testing for all athletes. This will be a polymerase chain reaction, or PCR. That is a test that is done by nasal or mouth swab, saliva, or blood testing. The results of that reveal the presence of the Y chromosome, which determines biological sex. So, in its announcement of this policy, World Boxing specifically called out Paris 2024 gold medalist Imane Khalif of Algeria, saying that she may not compete in a world boxing event until she undergoes sex testing. That includes the Eindhoven World Cup that starts on June 5th, right around the corner. Caused a little bit of a stir.
A little bit of a stir? I remember we talked about chromosome testing from like the 1970s and how it was totally debunked as a legitimate test for biological sex. And here we are going back to Y chromosome testing.
Yeah, and so the tests are problematic. Also problematic was that they called her out specifically. They have now issued an apology saying that the organization should have protected her privacy.
At one point, I remember having a discussion with, I think it was Jason Bryant, about, offline, about that wrestling was starting to do weigh-ins with athletes out of competition. So you wouldn't have athletes competing so far off from what their everyday weight was.
Interesting.
So that extreme cutting wouldn't be a thing anymore, that you had to compete closer to what is your actual weight. I'm hoping that's what the weight thing means, because that's actually a healthier situation for athletes. I doubt it is, because this is world boxing.
Right. Oh, this whole policy is still under revision by World Boxing's medical committee, so we will hopefully understand more as it comes down. But that's something to put on the list. I would love to talk across all weight sports, because that's an issue I think in every weight sport, is figuring out what weight you should be at. Because we talked with Louise Sugden, where she made the decision to switch a weight class, and that was
So did Bobby Body.
yes, and that was really tough to do, and ultimately did not work out very well for Louise because everybody went to that weight class. And also, we talked with Lauren Gibbs, how she said, my body wants to be at this weight, was not happy being underweight, but had to be underweight for the sled, which I get, but I'm curious as to what's going on in the weight sports and how they're dealing with these situations that can lead to really bad conditions mentally and physically later on.
And does a Y chromosome weigh less than an X chromosome? That's probably what they mean by the
Mind
weight.
blown.
Sono una forme belle.
That's right. Armani has unveiled its uniforms for Team Italia ahead of Milan-Cortina 2026. They are going for a monochrome look that is milky white, and Italia is it's sewn on there in prominent 3D embroidered lettering. The kit includes a whole bunch of jackets and trousers using Protectum 7 technical fabric. They've got a bomber jacket with an all over Italia print, tracksuits, t-shirts, polos, jumpers, trousers, hat and gloves, suitcase, mountain shoes with anti-slip grip, running shoes, all of this stuff. So the picture that they showed was athletes mostly in the white outfit with some in like a navy blue, really, really dark navy. Down colors, some of the jackets have collars that have the Italian flag on the inside. So when they flip down, you see the Italian flag. That is very cool.
But not that sweater that you liked so much that was for the torch unveiling.
Oh,
That
yeah,
hoodie
that's
that you
right.
saw.
I'm still hopeful. Maybe it's in the stuff we didn't see because they wanted the white look. Maybe. One of the hats, the winter hat, says Italia across it. There's another winter hat. I really liked this. Also white. Had some kind of emblem in the center with a red stripe on one side and a green stripe on the other. I thought that looked pretty slick.
A lot of milky white.
Yes, and that milky white, Giorgio Marni said, was to, quote, evoke harmony with the snow-covered peaks. Among sports values, respect is perhaps the most important, and I have distilled it into a vision of simplicity, clarity, and purity. What do you think?
It's milky white. It's a lot of milky white. It's a sea of milky white.
I'm curious if the Italia elements are subtle or if they will be very prominent like they were in Beijing.
So in Beijing, they had that hologram quality on the embroidered Italia, and you could not see that in photographs. You really could only see it in person. So, and I'm sure that was pretty expensive to produce. So maybe if it's you can't see it in photographs, kind of what's the point? Because the uniform is mostly going to be photographed.
Right.
But we couldn't see it in the photos if it's in this uniform. So it's a little hard to tell. But the picture of the team was great. I was like, there's Amos, there's Stefania, I was just looking at all my favorites. So I did not complain of my milky white sea of Italian athletes there.
If you are in Australia, you will be able to watch the Paralympics on Nine Network. They have secured the exclusive Australian rights for Milan-Cortina, both the Olympics and the Paralympics. They will have coverage on Channel 9, 9 Gem, and its broadcast video on demand platform 9 Now, as well as on Stan Sport, their subscription video on demand platform, and other digital platforms. So very cool if you are in Australia. Why did we not think of Stan Sport?
Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah, we got
Another
a lot
copyright
on our
we
plate.
lost.
Yeah, well, that's okay. We do have a lot on our plate anyway. More news from LA28. They got a car sponsor.
Were you surprised by this one? I was stunned.
I was pretty surprised. What made you surprised about this?
So Honda will be a founding sponsor and the official automotive sponsor. It's not an American company.
No, it's not.
You know, Toyota last year announced it would no longer be a top sponsor. So it's stepped away. So you need a new automotive sponsor. And I understand Honda has a long history with LA. That's where they had their first Honda America company was founded in LA. But wow, I really was surprised that it was not an American company that either didn't step up, didn't make the deal. You know, we don't know the back end workings, but Honda took the slot. So we're going to get Hondas everywhere.
That's right. So they are a sponsor for both LA 2028 and Team USA, because it seems like a lot of these sponsorships are going hand in hand for 2028. So
right, Honda is not replacing Toyota as a top sponsor. So it's not making the deal with the IOC, it's making the deal with Team USA and LA28.
that's right. So the door is still open for a top sponsor in the automotive category. Well, that will be interesting because LA kind of did the deal without I don't know if they had the IOC and like, where is the IOC in all of this? But they needed a car sponsor.
Those IOC members aren't going to walk.
Right. or take the newly expanded metro. Speaking of taking the metro, we've got a venue plan and sport program announced for the Paralympics. Nice little compact area.
Yeah, it's only going to be in LA, Long Beach, Carson, and Arcadia. So that's not a heck of a lot of territory.
No, it's about 35-mile radius, meaning all athletes are going to be able to stay in the same village on the UCLA campus, which is going to be awesome. In terms of events, there's going to be a total of 552 medal events across 22 sports with 4,400 athlete quota places. This is the same number that they've had for the last 2 Paralympics. So not much growth, it seems like, in terms of having more athletes there, even though we have a new sport. And there's going to be some new events too. 243 medal events for female athletes. That's 8 more than Paris. Number of events for male athletes has been reduced by 8 to 263. So again, like Dr. Donnelly talked about, we're taking from the men and giving from the women. The number of open or mixed gender events has increased by 3 to 46. So mixed gender events are fun.
You know I love them.
Yes. So, but they don't add to the overall. If you're looking at it from a gender equality lens or a gender equity lens, they're increasing the number of quota spots for female para athletes. So there will be 107 more quota spots for females at LA than at Paris. There's going to be 27 more for men than Paris had. 205 gender-free slots, which is a reduction of 134 places. For the second Paralympics in a row, and team sports will all have 8 teams this time around, which is the same in Paris. One new event I noticed that the IPC posted on Facebook, there's going to be frame running added to the para-athletic program.
Yes, I saw that. So I was trying to explain, like, how do you explain this? It's got 3 wheels and the runner stands up, but they're fully supported.
Right, so it's kind of like they're pushing a tricycle that has no seat.
Yes.
So you
And
would
you're
stand in center instead of there being a seat, that's where you stand and you push it. Athletes in this class have a severe coordination impairment like hypertonia, ataxia, and athetosis. There's going to be a men's and women's 100-meter race in this event, so it'll be cool to see something else added to the Paralympic schedule, and I bet will hopefully boost participation in that. But like, if you know somebody who could be a frame runner, they got 3 years,
get them in that.
right? We all know that some of these classes don't have very many people in them. Make some competition happen. The LA Times has reported that the LA County is doing a feasibility study to test the possibility of water taxis between San Pedro and Long Beach. There are no events in San Pedro, but there's probably hotels around there. It's kind of like you cut across a little port type area. San Pedro does have Croatia House coming to it. We already have hospitality news. I mean, more hospitality houses have been announced for LA than it seems like are opening for Milano-Cortina.
Well, because they can pick places. They don't have things that are 6 hours apart. They're like, "Get us a water taxi." "Oh, we got those." "You want an air taxi?" "Oh, yeah.
Air taxi.
I got a helipad in my house for you."
Plan now. U.S. Olympic swimming trials are coming back to Indianapolis in 2028.
Clearly, I have to go this time because you had so much fun last time.
It was so good. So much fun. And what an exciting venue to be in, because obviously they're going to have it at Lucas Oil Stadium again. And it will prepare people for what's going to happen at the stadium in Inglewood. Is that what they call it?
Yes.
Okay. It will really prep people for the Olympics, because I know SoFi will have a bigger audience, but this is pretty big, and they did a great job. People were so excited and lots of people came. So it's a good place to have trials. Also, if you are thinking that maybe you could qualify for 2028 U.S. Olympic marathon trials.
I have never thought that once in my entire life, that I could qualify for a marathon trial.
Have you ever thought about, like, you could finish a marathon?
No.
Yeah, running that far is not in these legs.
No. I can do many things. I can absolutely not run any distance whatsoever.
Can you run 100 feet?
I can walk it at a blazing pace. I
You should
walk
take up
faster than
race
I
walking.
run.
You should really take up
I
race
would be
walking.
fantastic at race walking, but I cannot run.
But if you do run and you run marathons and you think, oh, I wonder what it takes to qualify for trials, because a lot of places are, qualifying for trials is very cool. The qualifying time standards have been released. So men will need to be able to run 2 hours, 16 minutes flat. That is 2 minutes faster than Paris qualifying time. The women's time is 2:37 flat, and that's the same as Paris. You can start qualifying September 1st until 60 days before trials. If you would prefer to qualify via a half marathon, those times are 1:03 for men and 1:12 for women. Half marathon times are accepted starting January 1st, 2027. So you got some time to work on your marathon, and if that's not working out, but you have a pretty good half marathon, in a couple years you can try that too. We don't even have a date for trials.
But we got a time.
That's right. The last 3 Olympic trials were in February, so we will have a link to the finer print of what this all entails in the show notes. And if you do decide to pursue this route, please let us know. I'd love to know if there are some marathoners among us.
Yeah, you don't have to break my heart on this one because I broke it myself.
Oh,
I hurt my
really?
own I hurt my own feelings when I opened this email. I should have just left it for you. Because Paris 2024 Paralympic gold medalist in the men's 5,000 meter T13 race, Yassine Ouaddad El Atabi from Spain, has received a 3-year ban for an out of competition test that he was found positive for clostebol, which is an anabolic androgenic steroid. The ban, apparently there was a big delay in getting these results because this test was from 2024. They blamed it on a third party, that it wasn't El Atabi's fault or Spain's fault. It was just, I think the third party lab kind of put it in the back row and forgot to do it. But all his results dating back to the start of the Paralympics have been wiped out, which means he loses his gold medal. So neutral Paralympic athletes Alexander Kostin and Anton Kuliatin take a step up to gold and silver, and then bronze will go to Ecuador's Sixto Roman Moreto Criollo.
Frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot more. And I mean, this is what happens because it's kind of like, oh, yeah, the Paralympics have become way more competitive. And now we're seeing a lot more positive results, which on the one hand, I hate to say it's a positive thing, but it's also showing how the Paralympics are viewed as kind
True.
of equal in people's minds, that the glory of that Paralympic gold medal is so great now that they're willing to cheat for it, which is a horrible way to look at this, but I'm trying to stop hurting my own feelings with every doping story. Welcome to TKFLASTAN.
It is the time of the show where we check in with our team and keep the flame alive. These are our past guests and listeners who make up the citizenship of our very own country, TKFLASTAN. First up,
Team John Schuster will compete in the men's competition at the USA Curling's Olympic Trials in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, November 11th through 16th.
para swimmer Olivia Chambers was named to her second World Championship team. She will be competing at the Toyota World Para Swimming Championships in Singapore in September.
Swimmer Bobby Fink won the men's 1,500-meter freestyle at the U.S. National Championships.
Racewalker Evan Dunphy finished 5th in the 10-kilometer racewalk at the Madrid Marcha. He was not thrilled with that.
He was not happy. He's getting a little tired of the 4th and 5ths, I think.
Yeah. So hang in there, Evan. You will break through.
Paracyclist Samantha Bosco took home a gold in the road race and a silver in the individual time trial at the 2025 UCI Paracycling Road World Cup in Belgium.
Author Vicky Velosic's book, Swimming Pretty, The Untold Story of Women and Water, will be out in paperback on June 10th.
Gymnast Brody Malone got married on May 31st. Congratulations to he and his new wife, Serena.
Excellent. We always love a good marriage in Shuklistan.
And he wore his cowboy hat as he had promised his friends.
Good for you, Brody. All right, that will do it for this episode. Let us know what you think of the plans for LA 2028.
And you can chat with us and other listeners on our Facebook group, Keep the Flame Alive Podcast. Email us at flamealivepod@gmail.com. The voicemail and text line is always open at 208-352-6348. That's 208-FLAME-IT. And you can get even more Olympics and Paralympics from our weekly newsletter. Sign up for that at flamealivepod.com. We'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Next week, it's time for our next installment of stories from the Sydney 2000 Olympics and Paralympics. So tune in for that because I'm sure it's going to be jaw-dropping, as always, what we somehow didn't remember from those games. But those are always good stories. Tune in for that. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, keep the flame alive.